Look at the rod, you ready? Suffocation, no breathing. Don't give a fuck if I got my own breathing. That's the opening for today's vlogmas, because I hate being watched by Raj. Today I'm going to be doing a video probably nobody wants to see except for myself, and that is ranking all the horror books I read in the last year. These are, I just realized I meant to do this through October of last year, because I normally do it October to October, but I did not have time this year, been too busy, so I wanted to do this here. But since I've already prepped with all the horror books that I've read for this year only, that's where it's going to be. No books after, well, before January of this year. I think there are about 25 or so, not that many. I should say this is sort of a ranking video, basically tier ranking, the horror books that I read. And at its core, it is a horror ranking, like how scary it is, but I also have tried to modify it this year to be including ideas like, is it intending to be horror? Like, is it intended to be scary is what I mean to say? And if not, what type of horror is it intending to be? And sort of rank it in that sense. I also want to give a nod to Lock Petition, who created the Skull Ranking book tag. Oh, was it October 2020, I think? So this is where this all stems from, modified to my enjoyment. But before I get into the intro, let's talk about what each one means. We have horrifying, which I guess is the most obvious. 5 skulls, you are a terrifying book. Disturbing is one where you're approaching terrifying. Maybe you're unnerving to an extent, or you're just really unsettling in some sort of way. And then Goosebumps would be like, I'm very uncomfortable. Maybe this is gothic, but you're not quite disturbed. You're just like, ooh, getting like goosebumps as I read this, right? So that's sort of where I rank that one. It's kind of, they kind of blur together here, but like it's a book that I guess a gothic feel would fit in the Goosebumps category. You get this unsettled feeling, but nothing like too deep. And then there's the monstrous fun. I put this here now because I wanted to be able to categorize books that I think are really great horror books, but aren't intending to be scary, meaning they're not here to necessarily make you feel uncomfortable so much as just go balls to the walls with just really graphic horror type components. And then finally, I missed the horror, and this is, I want to be very careful here, this one skull. This isn't to say it's not horror. I just struggled to find where it fits into the category of horror from my perspective being limited, obviously. This isn't a slap against the book, it's just where I struggled to figure out why this is fitting in the horror genre. What component of horror is it giving me, even if it's not terrifying to me? Let's go ahead and get started. The first one's going to be a reread of 11/22/63. The category that says horror is kind of a stretch because it's not really horror. There's uncomfortable moments, but like people do categorize this as horror because it's Stephen King on Goodreads, so I kind of feel comfortable saying I miss the horror. I don't think it fits. Like it's dark fantasy, sure, dark sci-fi fantasy, but is it horror? I don't think so. I could see it sort of fitting into Goosebumps. There are times where I get uncomfortable with what's going on, but I guess there's a line between emotional, like on a character level, and emotional in a sort of a scary level. But I'm gonna stick to it. Feed, I would put this in monstrous fun because I don't know if Mira Granica Sean McGuire was trying to be scary here, but there was nothing scary about this. Teen, YA, zombie. And unfortunately, I wish it was more disturbing, but it wasn't. Going to Bed in Texas. Honestly, this book, I don't remember much about it. Hold on, I gotta think about this. It's definitely not scary or disturbing. Honestly, this book has left me. What was the essential plot about? I just realized this book left me. I know I didn't love it, but I remember people dying. It was a book about a bunch of people dying in Texas. And it was like just a bunch of freak accidents going on. And also a mystery in the family, a mystery in the town trying to be solved with this guy who's returned home for something. I can't say monster is fun. I don't want to say it's not horror, because it definitely is horror. But maybe I did miss the horror. I think it worked more as a mystery thriller. Shoot, I hate saying that for Stephen Campbell. I did not expect to do that, but I did not prepare much for this. The Devours, I would put this under disturbing. So this is a werewolf narrative, a queer werewolf narrative, where we have basically like a Anne Rice type story of a werewolf telling his life story to a journalist who's documenting it. But there is some queer tension between them, and the story is much different than, of course, Interview with a Vampire. But it has similarities in the structure, and I absolutely adored this book, both in its beautiful, monstrous writing. If it wasn't disturbing, I would put it in monstrous fun. But I don't think it's necessarily fun. It's definitely unsettling and disturbing at times. And the things that are going on, and I guess the way in which the monsters are crafted, it's very effective in my opinion. The Fisherman. This is a Lovecraftian story about seeing ghosts of dead wives and dead children. It's Lovecraft, so that we know as the reader that they're not actually them, but it is effectively terrifying. The Fisherman was a really good book, really well written, really well audio narrated. I had my quibbles with it, but you can watch my October wrap-up for that, because it was nearly a perfect book for me. Let's go with The Night Ocean. And this was a book I was not a fan of, but I will say there were moments that gave me goosebumps. This is effectively a historical fiction book, rewriting the life of Lovecraft as being in a queer relationship with a teen boy. There were parts outside of that hinted at Lovecraft world building in the modern times that was uncomfortable, but it did not really go anywhere, and I do not recommend this book. But the few parts that are there were disturbing. And I guess you could also say Lovecraft being in a relationship or being pursued by a teen boy is also disturbing in its own right, but not necessarily in a horror way. Moving on, The Changeling by Victor LaValle, a book that I absolutely adored. It's dark fantasy. I almost want to put it in monstrous fun. Let me think about it. No, I take it back. This was between goosebumps and disturbing. This book, I remember at the beginning, everything seemed so fine. And we knew it was a horror book, so we knew something wasn't fine. We knew something had to give. And the tension, it's so palpable and it's so unnerving that I was really on the edge of my seat. So I think I'm going to bump this up actually to disturbing. And I'm going to probably put it above The Devourers. I think there are parts where I felt more disturbed on an almost horror level. House at the Bottom of the Lake. This one is definitely disturbing. And I would actually give it close to horrifying. House at the Bottom Lake was a story about two teens dating, and they go canoeing and they find this tiny piece of lake where there was like a neighborhood, a very preserved, or maybe it was just a house that was very preserved in an uncanny and unnatural way. The story progresses slowly as we explore it more, and weird things start to happen. And it is undoubtedly disturbing. And honestly, because of the situations I listened to it in, I would actually say it was pretty horrifying at times. Like I was listening to this while I was on my cruise, and I remember sitting outside on the front deck where it was pitch black, and you could see the stars. It was gorgeous, and I got unnerved. Like I knew nothing was there, but it was one of those things where I think I'm gonna go inside now. And so I consider that a good, scary, effective book. Okay, then I reread the entire Wendy's Button Box book series. And this is between monstrous fun and probably goosebumps. There are parts of the first book that are pretty effective, I think, at making me feel disturbed. So I think I will say probably the first book is going to be Goosebumps above that book. Now go ahead and jump to the second and third book. Where are they? I'll put on Goosebumps. What was the second one? I would say probably, I don't remember the second book very well, honestly. I think I only remember the third book because I just heard Books and Lala talking about it. I think I'm going to keep them in Goosebumps. No, fuck budget. I'm going to put these now in Monstrous Fun, and honestly, even beneath Sean McGuire's book, because I think they're less effective. The horror fantasy is fun. That's what kept me coming back. But it's still not as fun world building on like a horror sense as I think the zombie apocalypse was. Cabin at the End of the World, I just reread that this month, actually, December. Undoubtedly disturbing because it gets scary. It's peak disturbing, and I had to sit on it a second. This was a hard one. I'm going to settle on disturbing, but I think I can make a case for it being horrifying because there are parts where it definitely got to me, but it is a solidly disturbing book. It's culty, and I loved it more the second go on. It was nearly utter perfection except for the subpar audiobook narrator, in my opinion. I'm really excited for the new M. Night Shyamalan adaptation of the book. Next up, we have Mary Grant again, Kingdom of Needle and Bone. It is not apocalypse. It's a pandemic, which came out before actual coronavirus. But this one will also be monstrous fun because it's really just about the world building being horror rich than it is actually disturbing. I mean, I guess there are parts you could say it was disturbing, but I just don't think it was the right kind of disturbing. Tenerife Dew, The Living Blood. It's not monstrous fun. Honestly, this is one where I'm bumping between Goosebumps and I miss the horror. Because while this is a vampire story, because it's a vampire, it's automatically latched into the horror genre. I think it fits more in the fantasy realm than it is like horror. I don't fucking know, actually. I'm going to give it the low end of Goosebumps because I don't want to say it's not horror. There are parts of it that definitely got to me. I think Tenerife Dew is a very effective horror writer. I don't think this is her at her best in terms of of horror writing, but I don't think it's necessarily trying to be that. But there are moments that definitely get to me, moments where we see characters acting in such a way, or we see certain situations that are uncomfortable. Okay, next up, Sean McGuire, Shadow of Spirit, Spindrift House, which is basically a Lovecraftian Haunting of Hill House homage, I believe. And I actually really adored this book. It easily gave me goosebumps. Was it disturbing? Ooh, I'm gonna give it a low and disturbing. It might even be higher than that, but I don't want to think about it too much because this is getting too long. But it was probably the most effective Mira Grant horror book at actually making me feel a little nervous, a little scared. I think it was because she was trying to recreate the Haunting of Hill House. You know, even the opening sequence of this entire book feels so akin to the opening sequence of Haunting of Hill House, which I absolutely adore, and that is so really disturbing. The Ones That Got Away by Stephen Graham Jones. Easily goosebumps. This series didn't really stick with me this collection of short stories by Stephen Graham Jones didn't stick very well with me. The ones that did work were definitely goosebumps, and maybe even meshed into disturbing. I think I'm going to stick with Goosebumps, high end of Goosebumps, strictly because there were plenty that didn't work for me. But those that did were very effective. The Tender is the Flesh. This is one that is peak disturbing, but never quite horrific. Now, cannibalism in this world where people are treated like chattel to be raised and graphically slaughtered is unnerving. And I don't think that's too much information. Like, that's the premise of the book. So I'm hoping it's not too spoilery for people. But anyways, it's really effective at making you feel uncomfortable. Not just like sick to the stomach, but just so disturbed on so many levels. Not just because of cannibalism, but because of the mindsets people have that are sort of explored more extensively in the book itself. I don't want to get too deep into it. I want to spoil it. Clive Barker, the Hellbound. This is easily monstrous fun, but I think it actually might venture into disturbing and horrifying. I'm trying to remember, was I actually scared? I really liked this more than I thought I would. I love Hellraiser as a premise, and I think the book was, I think I took it more seriously. What I mean to say, it was easier for me to take it more seriously than the movie than I thought it would be. So just because it feels right, because I want it to be true, I'm going to put it in the low end of horrifying. Dark Stars, which was a diverse collection of books. I say books, of short stories. Easily goosebumps. But there were plenty that weren't scary, so I'm just going to settle a sort of middle of the road, disturbing behind The Ones That Got Away, because there were some that weren't. That to me, I genuinely thought to myself, I missed the horror. But then there were those that were definitely disturbing, and maybe even borderline horrifying. Ooh, okay, so Whisper Down the Lane. I honestly didn't love this book for reasons I talk about when. I don't know when. But it was effective at being horrifying. This author, Clay McLeod or something, he's a really good horror writer. I think he undercut this book because it's a satanic panic, and it's made it very clear from the get-go that this is a satanic panic. It's not supernatural, and that's something that is made very abundantly clear. And I think there was a rich opportunity here to create a narrative that walked the line, at least for most of the story, that made us wonder, is this supernatural? Because that adds a level of, I think, terror, at least for me. He sort of just pushed the option out the window, and it really disappointed me as how the book works. But as a horror writer, he's really effective, and I honestly might return to him strictly because I think he's just really good. My Heart is a Chainsaw, easily monstrous fun. And actually, I don't think it was ever quite scary for me. It had that monstrous fun that's almost always, at least for me, in every single Stephen Graham Jones book. And it would have just, I don't know, it's easy for me to get immersed in the way that I haven't in a lot of his books. Flowers for the Sea, a novella about a woman giving birth on a remote island in a sort of secluded society where they sort of have their own life going on. And this one is going to be, I miss the horror, largely because I was lost. I didn't quite get the point of what this situation was supposed to be. That's not true. I'm not going to miss the horror. Actually, I think it fits in the low end of disturbing, because with the act of giving birth, even if I didn't quite understand the point of why we were telling this narrative, there were definitely disturbing parts in that story, I think. But I do want to say I still quite didn't get the point of what they were doing. Max Gladstone, Last Exit, which is borderline sci-fi horror. This is one I DNF'd at 80% because I just wasn't invested. But I will say it was a really effective dark fantasy. I think did a really good job of crafting the world in a way that I was really invested until I wasn't. I think it was a little too long for me and I just would have lost interest. Monstrous fun for sure. I think I'll give it Goosebumps, probably above the Button House. Square Cubed, this honestly was the entire reason I created this monstrous fun category, because I read this twice this year. It came out, was it January of last? No, December of last year, 2021. And then I read it, by the way, I mean the physical copy in March. And then I listened to the audiobook that just came out the 20th of December. I loved it both times, even more the second time, honestly. And I think this is the very definition of monstrous fun. We have two sisters who get separated when there was a giant rift in the fabric of reality, and giant warped monsters come through. And it's not just about that one moment, it's about the effect that the ripping of reality has on life, both for those near and far from what happened. It's really short, really fast-paced, but I absolutely adore this cosmic horror. This is the very definition of a very dark, monstrous, horror-filled world that isn't necessarily scary, but I think it's a really good horror book nevertheless. Into Every Generation of Slayer is Born, and this is kind of cheating because it's horror nonfiction, but it's not really scary. A book about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I obviously doesn't really quite fit into the horror, and it was never quite unsettling. Unlike, I think, Nightmare Fuel. Honestly, I think Nightmare Fuel, as it talked about different parts of books, it reminded me what makes horror so disturbing. So I would give this at least Goosebumps, if not disturbing. I think I'm just going to stick with like middle of the road Goosebumps, because I think it was an effective book about horror that made me really appreciate horror in a goosebumpy way. It reminded me of what I loved about horror the most, both on a scientific level and on just a fan level. Then we have Fairy Tale by Stephen King. Not much horror here. I miss the horror, that's for sure, but I'll put it above Every Generation. Fledgling, ooh, I hate to say it, but it's in the vampire book that's made horror because it's vampires. There's not really much horror. There are uncomfortable things going on, but to call it horror just feels wholly inappropriate. So we're gonna, honestly, probably less horror-y than Fairy Tale. But those are all the books that I have read this year at horror ranked. As you can see, actually, I really like this distribution. It's like a normal distribution where you have peak at Goosebumps and the fewest being at horrifying and I miss the horror. And I think that's a satisfying answer. And remember, when I rank these, if you made it to the end first off, thank you so much. But when I rank these, it's not saying this is a bad book. I think I made it very clear. There's bad books in each category. But just measure expectations of what you're getting from a horror book, because each horror book gives different things. But that's everything, and that's today's video for 13 days of Joshness, of Vlogmas. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Stay safe, everybody. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.